The man did not announce himself when he walked through the door. He never did. That had always been his way to arrive quietly, to observe before being observed, to let the room settle around him, the way still water settles after a stone breaks the surface. Marcus Johnson stepped through the glass entrance of Titan Global's headquarters at 9:47 on a Tuesday morning, wearing a pair of worn denim jeans, a faded canvas jacket, the color of dried clay, and work boots that had been resoled twice in the last decade. He was 55 years old, broad-shouldered, and carried himself with the unhurried ease of a man who had nothing left to prove. He had driven himself from his home 40 minutes outside the city, in a navy blue pickup truck that had 212,000 miles on the odometer. The lobby he walked into was a cathedral of polished marble and tempered glass. Security personnel stood at attention near brushed steel pillars. A pair of receptionists sat behind a crescent-shaped desk that probably cost more than some people earned in a year. Marcus approached calmly, told the young woman at the desk that he had an appointment with the chairman, and smiled the way he always smiled, without performance, without expectation. The young woman at the reception desk looked up from her monitor, and her expression shifted in a way she did not seem to realize was visible. It was the kind of shift that happened before the brain caught up with the eyes a flicker of assessment, a rapid cataloging of what she saw and what she decided it meant. The man in front of her did not fit the space. He did not match the room's language. Her gaze moved from his jacket to his boots, to the calluses visible on the backs of his hands, and she smiled the polished smile that had been rehearsed until it no longer resembled warmth. She asked for his name. He gave it. She typed it into her system with the slow deliberateness of someone who did not entirely believe what they were searching for. Around him, two men in tailored suits walked past without slowing. A woman in a silk blouse glanced at Marcus and then looked away with the practiced efficiency of someone accustomed to sorting the people around them. One of the junior employees near the coffee station murmured something to a colleague, and the colleague smiled without looking up. Marcus did not react to any of it. He stood at the desk with both hands relaxed at his sides and waited. A second receptionist leaned over to consult with the first, and the two of them exchanged a look that contained an entire conversation. The name was in the system. The appointment was confirmed, and yet neither of them moved to pick up the phone and notify the chairman's office the way they would have for someone who arrived in a press suit and a car with a driver. Instead, the first receptionist told Marcus she would need to verify the appointment with someone from management and asked him to please wait in the designated area. Marcus thanked her. He walked to the leather bench along the far wall, sat down, and folded his hands in his lap. He did not look at his phone. He did not drum his fingers. He simply sat, the way a man sits who has learned that patience is not passive, it is its own form of power. The morning light fell in long geometric slices across the marble floor. Somewhere in the building above him, a meeting was probably already underway. He had been in those meetings. He knew what they felt like from every seat at the table. Upstairs, a call had been made. Not to the chairman's office, to the office of the CEO. Victoria Reynolds had been CEO of Titan Global for 7 months, 2 weeks, and 4 days. She was 42 years old and had arrived in that chair by way of a business degree from Wharton, a decade at a private equity firm, 3 years running operations at a rival logistics company, and a reputation that preceded her in the particular way that sharp, ambitious women's reputations tend to precede them, with admiration from some and wariness from others. She was not accustomed to wariness herself. She was accustomed to walking into rooms and immediately understanding their contents. She had a gift for reading situations, for identifying weakness and leverage and opportunity within moments of encountering them. It was a gift that had served her extraordinarily well. It had also, without her knowing it, begun to calcify into something else. Something that no longer asked questions, because it believed it already had the answers. She stepped out of the elevator with her assistant 2 steps behind, and her expression set in the particular arrangement that her staff had come to recognize as her working face focused, slightly impatient, certain. She crossed the lobby floor with the efficiency of someone for whom every minute had a scheduled purpose. She took in the lobby as she walked. The 2 receptionists at the desk, The security personnel. The man sitting on the bench along the wall. She looked at him, the way you look at a problem that has been brought to your attention before you have had your morning coffee. She looked at his jacket, his boots, the way he sat without a briefcase or a portfolio or a laptop. She walked toward him with her heels clicking a clean rhythm against the marble. "Sir," her voice carried across the lobby with practiced authority. "Can I help you?" Marcus looked up. "I have an appointment with Chairman Whitmore," he said. 9:45. "I'm a few minutes late. I apologize." Victoria studied him. Something in her settled into certainty the way water finds level. "With the chairman," she repeated, and the repetition itself was a kind of challenge. "That's right. And what is the nature of this appointment?" She asked it the way you ask a question you believe you already know the answer to. Marcus held her gaze evenly. "I'd prefer to discuss the details with him directly, if you don't mind." The refusal to explain himself polite as it was landed in Victoria's chest as confirmation of what she had already decided. People with legitimate appointments did not deflect. People with legitimate appointments arrived in cars that matched the building. She took a slow breath and said what came naturally, what felt to her like the reasonable exercise of executive judgment. She asked the security personnel to escort him out. She told him this was a private facility for scheduled business. She said it without heat, without particular cruelty, simply with the flat confidence of someone performing a self-evident task. "Get out," she said. "We don't allow people like you in here." The lobby went very quiet. The two receptionists had stopped pretending to look at their screens. The junior employee near the coffee station had turned fully around. Two men in suits who had been walking toward the elevator slowed without stopping. A woman with a tablet tucked under her arm paused mid-stride and then continued, looking straight ahead. The security guard nearest to Marcus was already moving, his hand not quite reaching for Marcus's arm but hovering in that direction with the intention clear. Marcus stood. He did not hurry. He straightened to his full height, which was considerable, and smoothed the front of his jacket with both hands. He looked at Victoria Reynolds for a moment without speaking. His expression was not angry. It was something more difficult to read and, for that reason, something she could not immediately categorize or dismiss. Around the lobby, the silence had taken on weight. Several employees had gathered at the edges of the space, drawn by the particular human instinct that orients people toward scenes they pretend not to be watching. The kind of audience that never admits it is one. Victoria was aware of them, and this awareness sharpened her conviction. She was protecting the standards of this company. She was doing her job. Any reasonable person watching would understand that. The man had no identification, no documentation, no visible indication of belonging in this space. That she could not imagine how he might belong was not prejudice, it was, she told herself, pattern recognition. That distinction between prejudice and pattern recognition was one she had drawn so many times across her career that the line between them had become invisible to her. She did not know this yet. She would know it in 30 days. Right now she was standing in the lobby she had crossed every morning for 7 months, and she was certain. Marcus did not move toward the door yet. He stood in the wide-open center of the lobby and looked at the young security guard and then back at Victoria and asked, quietly, but clearly enough to carry across the stillness, "Is this the way this company treats its guests?" Victoria's jaw set. "This is the way this company maintains its security protocols," she said. "I'm going to ask you one more time." "I heard you the first time," Marcus said. He said it without edge, without performance, just information. He looked around the lobby at the marble, at the lighting, at the 60-foot glass wall that opened onto the city skyline, and something moved briefly across his face that no one in that room was positioned to read. Then he reached into the inside pocket of his canvas jacket and produced a folded piece of paper. He set it on the reception desk without comment. He looked at the receptionist. "Please give that to Chairman Whitmore," he said. "Tell him Marcus was here." He buttoned his jacket, turned toward the door, and began to walk. He had taken 5 steps when the elevator behind the reception desk opened. Not the main elevators, the private one. The one that required a key and a code, and was reserved for a single floor in the building and a single occupant of that floor. The doors were brushed steel, slightly set back from the main elevator bank, marked by no signage. They opened rarely enough that most employees had never seen them open at all. They opened now with a quiet hydraulic exhale, and the man who stepped out was 67 years old, silver-haired, and wearing a suit that had been made for his specific body by a tailor in London whose clients did not come to him. He came to them. Richard Whitmore, chairman and controlling voice of the Titan Global Board for 22 years, scanned the lobby with the eyes of someone who had spent decades reading rooms for a living. He saw the situation immediately. He saw the security guard's posture. He saw Victoria standing in the center of the floor with her working face on. He saw the gathered employees at the edges of the space. And then he saw the man in the canvas jacket walking toward the glass doors, and his expression changed in a way that was visible to every person in the lobby, a sudden and complete rearrangement of everything Richard Whitmore's face was doing. Marcus. He said it sharply, in the way you say someone's name when you are afraid they are about to disappear. He moved across the lobby faster than a 67-year-old man in a London suit typically moved. Marcus, wait, please. Marcus stopped. He turned. Richard crossed the last 20 feet of lobby in something very close to a run, which in his suit, in that space, in front of all those people, was extraordinary enough to make every person in the room stop breathing for a moment. He reached Marcus and extended his hand, and when Marcus took it, he covered it with his second hand and held it. The way you hold the hand of someone you have not seen in a long time and are relieved to have found. Sir, Richard said, I'm so sorry. I should have come down myself. Please, everyone has been waiting for you. He looked back at the room, and there was something in his expression that was not anger, not exactly, but was the kind of reckoning that precedes it. Boss, he said, the word landing in the lobby, like something dropped from a great height. Please, come in. The lobby had gone so still that the only sound was the soft, ambient hum of the building's climate system, and somewhere above, the muffled reverberation of the city beyond the glass. Victoria Reynolds had not moved. She stood exactly where she had been standing, but something in her posture had changed, a rigidity that had arrived without her permission, a stillness that was not composure but its opposite. She was looking at Richard Whitmore. She was looking at the way he held Marcus Johnson's hand. She was looking at the word he had just used. Boss. Not sir in the formal, polished way she herself had said it minutes ago. That polished corporate courtesy applied to men in certain kinds of clothing. But boss the way you say it to someone you actually answer to. The other employees in the lobby were experiencing their own versions of this recalibration. The junior employee near the coffee station had set down his cup. The two receptionists were looking at each other with expressions they would later struggle to describe. The security guard had stepped back. Richard turned toward the reception desk and asked quietly, his voice measured in the particular way that voices get measured when the person speaking is containing something, for the piece of paper Marcus had left. The receptionist handed it over without a word. Richard unfolded it, glanced at it, and refolded it with a care that told everyone watching that it was not nothing. He gestured toward the private elevator. He was talking to Marcus in a low voice as they walked, the kind of talking that fills a moment rather than the silence. Marcus said something, and Richard laughed, a short, genuine laugh, and the informality of it was somehow the most surprising thing that had happened yet. Victoria was still standing in the center of the floor. She watched them reach the elevator. She watched the doors close. The silence that followed was the kind that people look back on later and realize they will never entirely shake. The man they had just watched step into the chairman's private elevator was Marcus Elijah Johnson. He had been born 55 years ago in a two-bedroom house on a street in the kind of neighborhood that cities build highways through. When they are planning expansions, they do not intend to inconvenience the people they prefer. Not to think about. His mother had worked double shifts at a hospital laundry facility. His father had been a mechanic until a back injury ended his career, and a series of smaller misfortunes ended his presence in the household entirely. Marcus had grown up understanding, in the bone-deep way that children understand things before they have words for them, that the world sorted people into categories, and that the category he had been sorted into was considered by many to be a permanent address. He had chosen not to believe that. It was not a dramatic decision. It was not the kind of decision that comes with a moment of clarity and orchestral music behind it. It was the kind of decision that has to be made over and over, quietly, against daily friction, for years. He made it again at 17 when a guidance counselor told him his options were limited. He made it again at 19 when the bank declined his first application for a small business loan. He made it again at 22 when a potential client chose a competitor who presented himself with more polish and less ability. He made it each time as a simple, private, renewable act of refusal. A refusal to accept the category. By 20, he was working 2 jobs and taking community college courses in business and accounting. By 24, he had saved enough, through the kind of disciplined sacrifice that sounds simple and is not, to rent a half-bay in a commercial garage on the east side of the city. He fixed engines. He learned everything about every kind of equipment: commercial vehicles, industrial machinery, the unglamorous mechanical infrastructure that cities run on and rarely acknowledge. He began taking small contracts from companies that needed maintenance work done correctly and on time. He did it correctly, he did it on time. He reinvested every dollar he did not need to survive. By 30, he had 12 employees. By 35, over 100. By 40, Titan Global existed not under that name yet, but in the form that would become it: a diversified operations and infrastructure company with contracts across 6 states, a workforce that he knew by name at every level, and a culture that had been set by the man who had started the whole thing in a garage with 1 bay, and a willingness to outwork every obstacle in his path. He had built it for 20 years from the inside. And then, at 50, he had done something that everyone around him struggled to understand. He had stepped back. He had kept his shares a controlling stake that had never left his name. He had kept his seat on the board, quietly. He had installed Richard Whitmore as chairman, because Richard was trustworthy and capable, and because Marcus believed that the truest test of a leader was building something that could function beyond their own ego. And he had gone back to living the way he had always wanted to live, simply, purposefully, without the performance that wealth too often demands of the people who accumulate it. He still drove the pickup truck because it was a good truck. He still wore work clothes because he worked with his hands in his garden and his shop at home, and saw no reason to dress for an audience he had never invited. He had come to the Titan Global headquarters today because Richard had asked him specifically. There was a matter before the board that required his presence, his vote, his voice. He had not expected to need any of those things before he even reached the elevator. Upstairs, in the wood-paneled conference room on the 43rd floor, the board was assembled and waiting. When the private elevator opened and Marcus stepped out alongside Richard, the room rose. Not at Richard's entrance. They had seen Richard moments ago when he had received an urgent call and left at speed. They rose at Marcus's. 7 board members, 4 senior executives, and 2 legal advisors all got to their feet in the way that people rise for someone whose significance to them is absolute and not performative. Marcus told them all to sit down. He sat down himself. Richard sat beside him. They proceeded with the meeting. But Richard had not forgotten what he had seen when those elevator doors opened in the lobby below. At 1:15 in the afternoon, a meeting was called that had not been on any calendar that morning. It was not announced over the building intercom. It was not sent as a calendar invitation. It was delivered person to person, by Richard's assistant, to the members of the senior leadership team. Victoria Reynolds received the message at her desk. The message said, "Conference room A, 1:30, attendance required." She had spent the intervening hours at her desk, productive on the surface, but with a current running beneath her concentration that would not stop. She had asked her assistant, casually, who Marcus Johnson was. Her assistant had looked at her with an expression that answered the question before the words did. She walked into conference room A at 1:28. The room was already full. Board members, executives, legal. Richard Whitmore at the head of the table, and Marcus Johnson, still in his canvas jacket, in the chair to Richard's right, which was not the chair of a guest. Richard did not spend time on preamble. He pulled up the lobby security footage on the room's display screen. He played it from 9:47 to 10:03. The room watched in silence. The footage was clear. The audio was surprisingly good. Every word was audible. When it ended, Richard closed the display and sat back and looked at Victoria Reynolds. Victoria had prepared, in the car on the way to this meeting, a version of events that was structured and professional. She had been presented with an unidentified individual in a high-security lobby. She had exercised appropriate judgment given the information available. She had acted in the company's interest. She had done her job. The argument was sound. She had run it in her head several times, and it held together. She began to deliver it now, and it held together for about 45 seconds before Marcus spoke. He did not interrupt her. He simply said, when she reached a natural pause, "If I had actually been a delivery driver, would it have been all right?" The room was quiet. "I'm asking genuinely," Marcus said. "If I had come into this building today, as a man making a delivery, no appointment, no shares, no history with this company, would the way you treated me have been acceptable then?" Victoria opened her mouth and then closed it. Around the table, no one moved. "The reason I ask," Marcus continued, "is that the men and women who make deliveries to this building are also human beings. The people who clean these floors are also human beings. The security staff at that desk, the woman who brought coffee into this room 40 minutes ago, they are all human beings. And the way you treated me today is the way this company, under your leadership, treats people it has decided are worth less than others." He was not angry when he said it. His voice had the unhurried, precise quality of a man who speaks when he has something to say and not before. There was no performance in it. That, somehow, made it more devastating than anger would have been. It left the room without any of the scaffolding that anger provides: the permission to dismiss, the excuse to defend, the ability to say that the person speaking was emotional and therefore negotiable. Marcus gave them none of that. He gave them only the plain architecture of what had happened and what it meant, and the room had no choice but to stand inside it. Victoria sat very still. She was a woman of exceptional intelligence, and the intelligence that had always served her was now turning, slowly and with no mercy, on herself. She thought about the moment she had crossed the lobby floor. She thought about what she had seen when she looked at Marcus, and what she had decided about him before he had spoken a single word. She thought about the word she had used. "People like you." She had said it out loud. In a lobby full of people. On a camera. And she had believed she was right. "I want to say," she began. "You don't have to say anything right now," Marcus said quietly. "This isn't a courtroom. I'm not here for an apology." He looked around the table. "I'm here because Richard asked me to come, and because what happened this morning is a symptom of something worth examining, not just in one person in the culture of this company. The values that get set at the top move down. Every person in this building is watching how leadership behaves. They're deciding what is acceptable, what is encouraged, what is quietly permitted. If the person at the top of this organization dismisses a man because of how he looks, that message travels." He paused. "I know it travels because I built this organization and I watched it happen with other people. I thought we had built something different. I think we still can." Across the table, one of the senior vice presidents had his eyes on the surface in front of him. A board member was looking at her hands. A young executive near the door had his jaw set in the careful way of someone trying not to show that they are moved. Richard was looking at Marcus with an expression that was part admiration and part something older. The particular look of a man who has watched another man carry something heavy for a very long time and is watching him carry it. Still, Victoria Reynolds was looking at the table. Her eyes were bright. The composure that she had worn all morning, that she had worn for 7 months and 2 weeks in this role, that she had cultivated across 20 years of a career in rooms like this one, had come apart without her permission. She was not crying, not yet, but the effort of not crying was visible. She had spent her career being the sharpest person in the room. She had believed that made her ready for leadership. She was understanding, in this moment, with the kind of clarity that only arrives when something breaks rather than bends, what she had been wrong about. The board recessed. Informal conversations happened in the margins of the room. Richard pulled Marcus aside near the window. From the conference room on the 43rd floor, the city stretched out below them in the afternoon light, a dense, layered, complicated thing full of people sorted into categories they did not choose, living lives with different degrees of visibility. "What do you want to do?" Richard asked. Marcus looked out the window for a moment. He had built his answer in the silence of that lobby, in the long habits of a life spent solving problems rather than nursing grievances. "I want to see what she's made of," he said. "That's more interesting than whatever the other option is." The board reconvened. Victoria was asked to remain. She sat straight in her chair with her hands folded on the table, her career balanced on the 43rd floor of a building that a man in a canvas jacket had built from a half-bay garage. Marcus addressed the room one final time, and what he said landed differently than anything he had said before, because what came before had been a reckoning, and this was something else. He said, "A company is not its real estate or its quarterly returns. It is not the view from the 43rd floor or the marble in the lobby. A company is the sum of what it does to the people inside it and the people it encounters. How you treat someone who has nothing you need, that is the measurement. That is the number that tells you who you actually are." He looked at Victoria. The board expected termination. Victoria expected termination. She had spent the hour calculating severance, reviewing her contract, replaying the morning in the terrible loop of hindsight that changes nothing but costs everything. She sat and waited for the thing she deserved. Marcus said, "I'm not going to recommend your termination." A stillness ran through the room that was different from all the previous silences, not the stillness of shock, but of suspended breath. "The worst thing a person can do with a mistake," Marcus said, "is decline the lesson that came with it. Anyone in this room who has never failed a test of character, please leave now." He waited a beat. No one moved. Mistakes are expensive. Refusing to learn from them is more expensive. "I'm not interested in punishing you, Victoria. I'm interested in whether you are capable of becoming the kind of leader this company actually deserves." He named his condition. It was simple. It was not punitive in the conventional sense, though Victoria would later describe it as the hardest 30 days of her professional life. She was to report to each of 4 departments on a rotating basis: building maintenance, environmental services, physical security, and frontline customer operations. She was not to go as the CEO. She was to go without title, without her assistant, without her access badge to the executive floor. She was to work alongside the people in those departments, performing the actual tasks, on the actual schedule, at the actual pace. She was to keep a journal. At the end of 30 days, she would present what she had learned to the full board. She agreed. She was in no position not to agree, and she knew it. But the agreement itself, the moment when she said yes, was not entirely compliance. There was something in it that she could not have named yet, something that would take the 30 days to clarify. The first week was the hardest. She arrived at 5:45 in the morning to the maintenance bay in the basement of the building she had spent 7 months arriving at, through the executive parking level. She wore clothes she had bought specifically for the purpose, practical, durable, utterly unfamiliar. She was given a task list. She was shown how the equipment worked. She was introduced to a man named Gerald, who had been maintaining the climate systems in this building for 19 years and who looked at her, briefly, with the same assessment that she had applied to Marcus Johnson in the lobby, a rapid catalog of what he saw and what he had decided it meant. He was more polite about it than she had been. He showed her what she needed to know. He did not explain things twice. She took notes. She worked alongside a woman named Denise in environmental services who had 3 children, one of whom was in college, on a partial scholarship that Denise supplemented by picking up weekend shifts that the company technically did not require of her. Denise was 38 years old and had worked for Titan Global for 11 years and had never, in those 11 years, had a conversation with anyone above the level of her direct supervisor. She did not know what the 43rd floor looked like. She knew the basement and the service corridors and the schedule that moved her through the building in the hours before and after the people whose offices she cleaned were present to observe it. Victoria worked beside Denise for 3 days. By the end of the first day, she was tired in a way that her desk and meeting existence had not prepared her for. By the end of the 3rd day, she understood the shape of Denise's day in the way you understand something when you have moved through it yourself rather than past it. She stopped keeping her distance, and started asking questions. Not the executive kind of questions, not the questions designed to extract information and generate action items. The human kind, the kind that begin with actually wanting to know. She met a security officer named Thomas, who had served overseas and returned with a quietness that the lobby never fully accommodated. She worked alongside a customer service team member named Ariel, who handled between 40 and 60 calls per shift and who had developed, through the sheer accumulation of other people's problems, a patience that Victoria recognized as a skill she had never been required to build. She kept her journal each night. The entries in the first week were careful and distant, written in the voice she used for reports. By the second week, the voice began to change. By the third week, she was writing things she had not intended to write, not about the company, but about herself. On the 14th day, she ate lunch in the basement break room with Gerald and 2 members of his maintenance team. One of them was 23 years old and saving for a trade certification. Another was 51 and had been at Titan Global for 16 years and knew the building's mechanical systems the way a doctor knows a body. Every system, every tendency, every warning sign. He was named Ray, and he spoke about his work with a specificity and a care that Victoria had only ever heard from people discussing things they loved. She sat with her lunch and listened to Ray describe a pressure calibration issue he had identified 2 months ago, a subtle variance in the readings that no one else had flagged, and how he had tracked it and documented it and corrected it before it became a failure that would have shut down the climate systems on 7 floors. She thought about the 43rd floor. She thought about the meetings she had sat in while Ray was in the basement making sure the building worked. She thought about what Marcus had said. The people who are most invisible are often the most essential. She wrote it in her journal that night. Underlining it felt insufficient. On the 30th day, she presented to the board. She did not use slides. She stood at the front of the conference room on the 43rd floor and spoke for 37 minutes from her journal and her memory, and the 30 days that had restructured something in her that she did not yet have. Perfect language for. She talked about Gerald and Denise and Thomas and Ariel and Ray. She talked about what she had learned about the building she had been running without understanding. She talked about a series of operational inefficiencies she had identified from the ground level that no one on the executive floor had known about, not because the information didn't exist, but because the channels through which it might have traveled had never been built. She talked about what it felt like to be invisible in a building where you mattered enormously. She talked about the morning in the lobby. She did not qualify it or contextualize it. She named it for what it was. She had seen a man and decided what he was worth before he had done anything other than exist in her field of vision. She had used authority to enforce that decision. She had been wrong, and not in the small, incidental way of someone who makes a judgment call under pressure and gets it wrong. She had been wrong in the deeper way, in the habitual way, in the way that had been operating in her for longer than she wanted to calculate. The 30 days had not fixed that, but they had named it, and she believed, standing in front of the board, that naming it was the necessary beginning. Marcus Johnson sat at the end of the table and listened to her speak. He said nothing until she was finished. Then he thanked her, not in the careful corporate way, just thank you. 2 words, delivered with the same unhurried directness he applied to everything. The board approved a series of structural changes to Titan Global's employee engagement and internal communication practices. Several of them had been in Victoria's presentation. Ray, who had flagged the climate system variance, received a formal commendation and a promotion to lead maintenance supervisor. A program was established modest at first, with the intention of growing that rotated senior executives through frontline departments on a quarterly basis. Denise's weekend supplement pay was formalized as a standard overtime structure that applied to her entire department, correcting an oversight that had been present in the payroll system for 6 years, without anyone on the 43rd floor noticing. The full company town hall was held 6 weeks later. It was attended by every level of the organization in person on the main campus and remotely at the regional offices. Victoria stood at the podium. She spoke about the culture she intended to build and the leader she intended to become. She cited names. She cited Gerald and Denise and Thomas and Ray. She cited the 30 days and what they had cost her and what they had given her. She cited Marcus Johnson, founder, architect, builder of the thing they were all part of. And she said, clearly, that she owed him an apology that was not sufficient to the offense, but that she offered without condition. In the front row, Richard Whitmore had his hands folded in his lap and was looking at the ceiling with the expression of someone trying not to show that they are moved. Marcus was in the room. He was in the back. Standing, as was his habit, he had always preferred standing. Said sitting made him feel like the meeting was happening to him rather than with him. He had come without announcement. Several people near him during the speech looked over and seemed to recognize him and seemed to not know what to do with that recognition. So they returned their attention to the front of the room, which was, after all, where the action was. When Victoria finished speaking, the room was still for a moment, in the way rooms are still when something true has been said in them. And then it began, first one person, then another, then the whole room rising in sections like a wave moving from front to back. Applause that had the quality of release, of something that had been held finally being set down. Victoria stood at the podium and let it happen, and looked like a person who was still learning how to receive something she knew she had not yet earned, but had committed to spending the rest of her tenure in that building working toward. At the back of the room, Marcus clapped, not loudly, not with the raised hands of someone making a performance of it. He clapped the way he did most things, without announcement, without exhibition, because it was the right response, and he meant it. Afterward, in the hallway outside the auditorium, Richard found him. They stood together the way old colleagues stand beside each other, rather than facing each other, watching the flow of people out of the room. "What do you think?" Richard asked. Marcus watched a woman in a maintenance uniform stop to congratulate Denise, who was standing near the auditorium doors, with a kind of composure that had a whole life's weight behind it. He watched Ray from maintenance, talking to a vice president near the water station, both of them with cups in their hands, speaking with the easy directness of people who had recently discovered they had things to say to each other. He watched a young man near the exit hold the door for an older woman, carrying a tray of disposable cups, and he watched the woman thank him, and he watched the young man smile in the way you smile when you are seen and it surprises you. "I think," Marcus said, "that it's a start." 3 days after the town hall, Marcus received a handwritten letter at his home address. He did not know how Victoria Reynolds had found the address. He suspected Richard, who occasionally exercised judgment on Marcus's behalf, that Marcus had not authorized but could not entirely object to. The letter was 3 pages long, written on plain, unlined paper, in a hand that was clearly the product of old-fashioned penmanship instruction, but had gone slightly uneven with the pressure of what was being said. Victoria thanked him for the 30 days. She thanked him specifically, not in the way people thank you when they want to close a chapter, but in the way people thank you when they want to begin one. She described a moment in the second week, working alongside Denise, when she had looked up from the task in front of her and seen the building, her building, the one whose lobby she crossed every morning without looking at anything below eye level from a position she had never occupied before, and had felt something she called, in the letter, a productive vertigo. She said she was not sure she would ever fully stop experiencing it. She hoped she would not. She said she understood now that what she had taken for competence was, in several important respects, a form of blindness, and that she was committed to spending the remainder of her career learning to see. She did not ask for forgiveness. She did not request a meeting. She said only that she wanted him to know that the 30 days had mattered, and that she intended to make them count for something beyond herself. Marcus read the letter twice. He folded it and put it on his workbench in the back room, where he kept things that were worth keeping. He drove himself home that afternoon in the truck, with 212,000 miles on the odometer. The city moved around him on the highway, the way it always moved, layered and various and full of people with histories that intersected and diverged without anyone on the outside being able to read the connections. He did not listen to anything. He drove in the particular quiet of a man who has enough in his own head to keep him company. Somewhere on the highway, in the lane next to him, a flatbed truck was carrying construction materials to wherever the next thing was being built. Marcus watched it for a moment, the load secured with orange straps the driver's arm resting on the open window, and felt the particular satisfaction of a man who has spent his life building things and believes that building is worth doing. He had once been told, by a banker who declined to finance his second round of expansion, that the problem with men like him was ambition without the foundation to support it. He had thought about that sentence often across the years that followed. He had thought about what the banker meant by foundation. He had thought about what the banker saw when he looked at a man in worn work clothes asking for the money to build something that did not yet exist. He had thought about all the ways that the world tells people who they are before asking them. And he had decided, as he had decided many times since, that the only answer worth giving was the work itself. The answer you built with your hands. The answer that stood up when the conversation was over. He exited the highway and drove the last 15 minutes home through small roads he had taken 10,000 times. He pulled into his driveway and cut the engine and sat for a moment in the truck's silence. The house behind him was not small, but it was not the house that people imagined when they learned what he was worth. It was the house of a man who built a home for living in, rather than for the impression it made on the street. There were tools in the garage and a vegetable garden along the south fence, and a workbench in the back room, where he spent his Saturday mornings on projects that had nothing to do with any company and everything to do with the satisfaction of making something work. He got out of the truck. He went inside. He made coffee, the way he always made coffee, standing at the stove with a pot and grounds and water, because he had never seen the need for anything more complicated. He took his coffee to the back porch and sat in the chair that faced the garden. The late afternoon light was doing what it did at this time of year, going gold at the edges, softening, preparing its exit. He thought about the lobby. He thought about the marble and the glass and the 60-foot wall looking out over the city that he had given a name and a direction and 40,000 jobs. He thought about the young woman at the reception desk who had typed his name into her system and decided before finding it what the result would mean. He thought about Victoria Reynolds crossing the lobby in her heels, sharp and certain, with the particular confidence of someone who has confused the ability to identify weakness in others with the ability to understand them. He did not think about these things with anger. He had never found anger to be a particularly efficient tool. He thought about them the way you think about material that has revealed a flaw with attention, with a certain scientific interest in what the flaw tells you about the structure. He thought about Denise and Gerald and Ray. He thought about Ariel's patience and Thomas's quietness and the 23-year-old saving for his trade certification. He thought about all the buildings like the one on the 43rd floor, all the lobbies like that one, all the mornings like that one, in which men and women were sorted by the shorthand of appearance and assumption and told, in words or in silences that said the same thing, that they were in the wrong place. She took a long drink of his coffee. The garden was doing well. The tomatoes along the south fence were ahead of schedule. The pepper plants he had started from seed in late March were coming in strong along the eastern row. He had built the raised beds himself the summer before last. From reclaimed cedar he had sourced from a deconstruction site on the far side of the county. The man running the site had been 26 years old and running his first solo project, and Marcus had spent 45 minutes talking with him about drainage and load distribution and the cost of getting the foundation right before worrying about anything else. The young man had not known who he was talking to. He had thought he was talking to a retired contractor, which Marcus considered a decent approximation. They had exchanged numbers. Marcus had followed up twice, which was his custom when he thought someone was building something worth building. He had set it to the board, and he had meant it, and it was the truest thing he knew about the work he had spent his life doing. Status can make people afraid of you. A title can command a room. Money can move mountains, as the saying goes, though Marcus had found that what money actually moved was other money, and that mountains were moved by people, by the Geralds and the Denises and the Rays, by the ones whose names did not appear on the buildings, by the ones who showed up before the lights came on and stayed after they went off and made everything function that the people on the 43rd floor depended on, without ever thinking about where the dependence ran. The architecture of any institution was not the glass and steel, it was the people who kept it standing. That was the truth that the lobby had temporarily contained, but could never actually contradict. He set down his cup, A cardinal landed on the fence post at the corner of the garden and sat there for a moment, bright, purposeful, requiring nothing from him, and then lifted off and was gone. Status, Marcus thought, could make people afraid of you, but only respect earned and given, flowing in both directions, offered without condition, could make them trust you, and trust was the only foundation that held. The garden needed water. He got up to water it.